My mother looked me in the eyes and said we never wanted you before shipping me off to boarding school the second my sister was born, but when I refused to return after graduation, she was furious. My parents never wanted a son, and I was not just an unwanted accident. They resented me. They had planned for a perfect life with 2 daughters, and I ruined that from the moment I came into existence. They could not even look at me without that sense of disappointment clouding their eyes. Maybe it was because I did not come out the way they had envisioned. Maybe they just never had the capacity to love me. Either way, I was their burden, the constant reminder of something that went wrong. I remember overhearing them once back when I was about 5. They were arguing in their bedroom, the kind of hushed, angry voices that adults think kids cannot hear. My dad was telling my mom that it was not her fault that these things happen, but she was hysterical, screaming about how she wanted daughters, how this was not supposed to happen to them. They were not supposed to be that couple, the one with the boy they did not want. After I was born, they went to every top fertility clinic in the country. Johns Hopkins, Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, you name it, they were there. Even though they were young and healthy, they kept thinking something was wrong. They needed a reason why they could not have the perfect family they dreamed of. They flew to London, visiting some elite fertility center on Harley Street, and even went as far as Switzerland for treatments. My mom would come home with bags of vitamins and hormonal injections, swearing that this time it would work, but it never did. Until one day when I was 6, they came back from another consultation, this time in New York. My mother was glowing, a look I had not seen on her face since I could remember. She was pregnant. Finally, their dream of 2 perfect daughters was back on track. For the first time, my mom did not look at me with that cold, detached stare. She was not thinking about me at all. I did not exist anymore. Everything became about the baby girl she was carrying. The pregnancy was treated like royalty. My mom stopped working, entirely hired nutritionists, personal trainers, a doula, and of course, the best doctors money could buy. When my sister Isabella was born, the world stood still. She was the golden child from the moment she took her first breath. I still remember the moment they brought her home. My mom held her like she was a delicate, precious thing, her face beaming with pride. They named her after a queen. Of course they did. The contrast between the way they treated her and the way they treated me was staggering. While I was tolerated, Isabella was celebrated. Every milestone she hit was cause for a party. When she smiled, they swore it was a sign of her brilliance. I had never seen them so happy, and it was all because of her. After my sister came home, they sent me away to a private boarding school in Vermont, someplace called Northwood Academy. I never wanted to leave San Francisco, but they made it sound like an incredible opportunity. The truth was, they could not wait to get rid of me. With Isabella in their lives, they no longer needed me around to mess up their perfect family image. I was packed off like some unwanted luggage, shipped out of their lives and into a school full of strangers. Northwood was not just a boarding school. It was a fortress for the elite, the kind of place where the children of senators, chief executive officers, and foreign diplomats went. The grounds were pristine, filled with manicured gardens, sprawling libraries, and more amenities than a kid could possibly need. But none of that mattered, because from day one, I knew I did not belong. My classmates did not care that I came from money, not when they could sense that my own parents did not care about me. They found out quickly that I was a throwaway kid, the one whose family did not even pretend to love him. And when you are in a place like that, kids know how to exploit your weaknesses. They gave me nicknames, the reject mistake leftover. Those were the ones they threw at me in the hallways or in the dining hall. I would be eating lunch and someone would say, "Oh, look, there is the one his parents did not want." I would laugh it off, but it cut deep. They knew I was not like them. They had families who visited, who cared. No one ever came for me. As the years went on, my parents became more and more distant. They visited me maybe once a year, and even then it felt like an obligation. The visits were short, stiff affairs, where they would check in on my grades, lecture me on behavior, and then leave as quickly as they arrived. My mom would talk about how amazing Isabella was, how she was already excelling at ballet, how she was going to private tutors to be the best at everything, and I knew that every penny they spent on me was wasted in their eyes. I was not worth their time or their attention. The only person who ever seemed to care was my Uncle David. He was my dad's younger brother, and he worked in a factory in Oakland. He was not rich, nowhere near it. He did not live in a mansion or drive fancy cars, but he was the only person who ever showed up for me. He would visit me on the weekends when no one else did. He did not say much, but just knowing he was there made things bearable. He would take me out to eat or to see a baseball game, and for those few hours I could almost forget that I was the unwanted child. David worked at an automotive parts factory, managing a team of workers who made engines. His life was simple, but he seemed happy. Whenever I went to visit him, I envied that. He did not have the burden of trying to live up to some impossible standard. He was content with his life, with the small apartment he lived in and the group of friends he had. I think in a way he saw something of himself in me, the one who did not quite fit into the family mold. He would tell me stories about growing up, how he always felt overshadowed by my dad's success, how he was always expected to do more, be more, but he never quite measured up. I understood that feeling all too well. By the time I was a teenager, I had learned how to shut out the pain, the loneliness, the rejection. It all became background noise. I knew I was not going to be anyone's priority, so I stopped trying to be. I focused on school not because I wanted to, but because it was the only thing I had. I was not popular, I was not athletic, I was just there floating through each day, waiting for it to end. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the feeling of being unwanted always lingered. Even when I was surrounded by people, I felt alone. My parents had their perfect daughter, and I was just a reminder of a mistake they would rather forget. And so I drifted through the years caught between two worlds, the world of privilege and the world of isolation. I had everything money could buy, but none of it mattered when the people who were supposed to love me could not even stand to look at me. That is how I survived, not by living, but by enduring. By the time I graduated from Northwood Academy, I knew one thing for sure: I was done with my parents. They may have paid for everything, and sure, they had the money to send me to the best schools, but emotionally they had abandoned me years ago. Financial support was all they ever gave me, and I was fine with that now. I did not need the love or approval anymore, just their money, and I was determined to use it to get as far away from them as possible. After graduation, I decided to study abroad. It was not just about wanting to escape San Francisco and my family. I wanted to be in a place where I could start fresh somewhere that did not hold memories of being the reject or the son they never wanted. I applied to several top universities and eventually got into the London School of Economics. LSE was prestigious elite, and far enough away from home that I would not have to see my parents or my sister Isabella, except for the rare family holidays where I could not make an excuse to skip them. My parents did not fight me on it. I think they were relieved, to be honest. My father wired me a large sum of money for tuition, housing, and expenses, and I suspect he was secretly glad I chose London. The distance meant they could maintain the facade of a caring family while not actually having to deal with me in person. LSE was everything I hoped it would be. The city, the people, the energy, it all felt like the perfect place for me to reinvent myself. I was studying brokerage and finance, hoping that one day I would be able to make my own wealth and prove that I could succeed without the Hastings name behind me. I was tired of being seen as the unwanted son living off a trust fund. I wanted to build something of my own. But university was not without its challenges. From the moment I arrived, I could tell I did not fit in with the old money crowd. The British elite had their own rules and hierarchy, and they were quick to remind anyone who was not part of their world that they did not belong. My accent and background were easy targets. Some of my classmates, mostly sons of aristocrats and old family wealth, would make snide comments. "Oh, here comes the American. Is that how they do it in the colonies?" It was not the kind of bullying I dealt with in Vermont, but it was constant, subtle, and always designed to remind me that I was an outsider. Still, I did not let it get to me. I had grown up being an outsider in my own home, so dealing with a few privileged snobs was nothing new. What kept me going was the plan I had in my head: succeed, get rich, and never have to look back at these people or my family again. It was not all bad, though. I met people who, like me, were there to carve out their own place in the world. One of those people was Tom, a guy from Toronto, who was studying the same thing I was: brokerage and financial markets. Tom and I hit it off immediately. He was not part of the British elite either, and we bonded over our shared experiences of feeling like outsiders. Tom was smart-driven and had a knack for seeing opportunities where others did not. We both knew we did not want to end up working for someone else our whole lives, so we started brainstorming ideas for our own brokerage firm. We spent our free time at the exclusive clubs where the wealthy and powerful gathered, places like the Civil Club and the Reform Club, places dripping with tradition and old money. We were not there to socialize. We were there to observe, learn, and make connections. We wanted to understand how the elite operated, how they moved their money, how they built their empires. It was not easy getting into these places. You had to be invited or know someone who could get you through the door, but Tom and I managed to network our way in, first as guests, then as regulars. At those clubs, we met people who would later become our clients. Hedge fund managers, real estate tycoons, venture capitalists. We did not stand out, which was exactly how we wanted it. We were there to learn the game and eventually to play it better than anyone else. In my final year, something happened that I did not expect. I met a girl, Emily. She was studying economics like me and was as driven and ambitious as I was. Emily was not from an elite family either. She was from a middle-class background in Manchester, and she understood the value of hard work. We clicked almost instantly. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had found someone who saw me not as the unwanted son or the outsider, but just as me. Emily, Tom, and I spent our final year planning our future. We were going to open a brokerage firm in New York, where the real money was. The three of us saved every penny from our internship, scraping and saving, knowing that if we wanted to make this dream a reality, we would need capital. Between the three of us, we managed to pull together $250,000, not a huge sum in the grand scheme of things, but enough to get us started. We decided to call our firm Evergreen Capital. It was simple, classic, and conveyed a sense of growth and stability. We knew the competition in New York would be fierce, but we were confident in our skills and our plan. We were going to target high-net-worth individuals and small institutions, offering them personalized financial services that the big banks could not provide. Meanwhile, back in San Francisco, my parents were as distant as ever. They had stopped pretending to care about what I was doing. The only time I ever heard from them was when they needed me to show up for some family event, or when Isabella wanted to brag about her latest achievement. Isabella had grown up being groomed to despise me, and she played the role of the perfect daughter to the hilt. She was excelling in everything: ballet, piano, even academic competitions. My parents doted on her endlessly, and she knew it. They had raised her to believe that she was the star of the family and that I was nothing more than a failed prototype. She made sure I knew that too. I remember the last time I saw her before I moved to New York. It was at some charity gala my parents had dragged me to. Isabella was all smiles, charming the crowd, while I stood in the corner counting the minutes until I could leave. At one point, she came over to me, her face still plastered with that perfect smile, and said, "You know, they only invited you because they needed to fill out the family photo." That was the last straw. I left the gala early, booked a flight to London that night, and decided I was not coming back. When we finally graduated, Tom, Emily, and I moved to New York and set up Evergreen Capital in a small office in Midtown. It was not much, just a few desks and computers, but it was ours. We hit the ground running, using every connection we had made over the years, every bit of knowledge we had gathered from those elite circles, to land our first clients. We knew the market was competitive, but we were determined to carve out our own space. The first year was tough. We worked long hours, often 7 days a week, hustling to build our client base. We were up against firms that had been around for decades, firms with billions under management, but we did not let that intimidate us. Slowly but surely, we started to gain traction. We landed a few small institutional clients, hedge funds, that were looking for a more personalized approach, and before long, our reputation started to grow. It was not just business that was thriving. My relationship with Emily deepened as well. She was not just my partner in the firm, she was my partner in life. For the first time, I felt like I had a real family, one that I had chosen, one that actually cared about me. But despite all the success we were starting to see, I could never fully escape the shadow of my family. My parents would occasionally send me updates about Isabella's accomplishments, as if they were trying to remind me of my place in the hierarchy of their lives. They had moved on without me, but they wanted to make sure I knew that they had not forgotten me completely. It was their way of keeping me tethered to them, even if I no longer cared. Evergreen Capital was growing steadily. Our hard work was paying off, and our client base expanded with every passing quarter. The firm was not just surviving anymore, it was thriving. We had gone from a small office in Midtown to a sleek, modern space with a panoramic view of Manhattan. It was surreal at times to look around and realize that we had built all of this from scratch, with no help from anyone but ourselves. Tom, Emily, and I had created something real, something that was ours, and I was proud of it. We were starting to land bigger clients, families with long-held fortunes, investment firms that needed fresh blood to manage their wealth, and even a few celebrities looking to diversify their portfolios. We were not the biggest firm in New York by any stretch, but we had carved out a niche for ourselves. I was finally living a life that felt separate from the one I had been trapped in for so long. My parents were still distant, occasionally sending obligatory updates about Isabella's endless accomplishments, but I had stopped caring. They were ghosts from a past I had no interest in revisiting. I was focused on the future, on my firm, on my relationship with Emily, and on the plans we had to expand Evergreen Capital. But then everything started to unravel. It began with a phone call from my Uncle David. I had not spoken to him in a few weeks, which was not unusual. He was always busy, and I was caught up in my work. But when I picked up the phone, his voice sounded off. It was weaker than usual, like he was struggling just to get the words out. He brushed it off when I asked if he was okay, saying he was just tired from work, but something in the back of my mind told me that was not the whole story. A month later, I got another call. This time it was not David. It was someone from the factory where he worked telling me that my uncle had collapsed on the job and had been taken to the hospital. I dropped everything and flew to Oakland as fast as I could, hoping that it was just some minor issue. But when I arrived, I was told the truth. David had cancer stage 4. He had known for months, maybe longer, but he had not told anyone, not me. Not his coworkers, no one. He had been silently battling the illness, continuing to work at the factory, not wanting to be a burden on anyone. I felt a wave of guilt crash over me. I should have noticed something was wrong. I should have pushed him to tell me what was going on. But David had always been so independent, so private, that it did not surprise me he had kept this from me. By the time I arrived at the hospital, it was too late. David was unconscious, hooked up to machines that were keeping him alive. The doctors told me there was not much time left and that he had refused treatment for months, preferring to live his life the way he wanted to without hospitals and doctors telling him how long he had. I sat by his bedside holding his hand, wishing I could do something, anything to make things right. But in the end, there was nothing I could do. David passed away the next day, leaving me with a deep sense of loss and regret. The funeral was small, just a few of his friends and coworkers. My parents did not come, of course. They had not seen David in years, and I knew they would not have cared even if they had. But I was not thinking about them. I was thinking about how David had been the only person who ever showed me unconditional love, the only one who had been there for me when no one else was. Losing him felt like losing the last real connection I had to any kind of family. After the funeral, I found out that David had left everything he had to me. It was not much: his small apartment, some savings, and a few personal items. But it meant the world to me that he had thought of me even in his final days. It was not the money or the things that mattered. It was the fact that David had seen me as his family, something my parents never had. For a while, I tried to focus on work, pouring myself into Evergreen Capital to drown out the grief. But then came the next blow, something I had not seen coming at all. My mother, Caroline, had always been the mastermind in the family. My father, Christopher, was powerful in the business world, but my mother was the one who pulled the strings behind the scenes. She had this cold, calculating way about her that always unsettled me, even when I was a child, and now she had decided to use that against me. A few weeks after David's death, I received a letter from my parents' lawyer. It was a formal notice that they were contesting David's will. They were claiming that David had been mentally unfit when he wrote it, and that the assets he had left to me should rightfully go to them. At first, I could not believe it. My parents had never shown any interest in David or his life, and now they were trying to take away the one thing he had left me. It did not take long for the truth to come out. My mother had orchestrated the whole thing. She had convinced my father that David's assets should be theirs and that I did not deserve anything from him. She was using this as an opportunity to destroy me, as she had apparently told one of her friends. She saw me as a threat now, someone who had built a life without her, someone who had succeeded without needing her approval or her money, and in her twisted mind, I had to be punished for that. The legal battle that followed was brutal. My parents had the best lawyers money could buy, and they were not afraid to use every dirty trick in the book. They painted me as an ungrateful son who had abandoned his family, claiming that David had been manipulated into leaving his estate to me. It was all lies, of course, but in the world of legal battles, the truth often takes a backseat to who has the most resources. I fought back with Emily and Tom by my side. We hired our own legal team using some of the money we had saved from Evergreen Capital to cover the costs. It was not just about the money anymore, it was about principle. I was not going to let my parents take away the one thing David had left me, the one person who had ever truly cared about me. The fight dragged on for months, with both sides refusing to back down. At the same time, my parents started using their influence to try to sabotage Evergreen Capital. They began spreading rumors in the financial world, using their connections to cast doubt on our firm's legitimacy. It was underhanded and cruel, but it did not surprise me. This was exactly the kind of thing my mother would do. She wanted to see me fail, to see me crawling back to them for help, begging for forgiveness. But I was not going to give them that satisfaction. We doubled down, working even harder to prove ourselves in the market. Our clients stood by us, trusting that we would continue to provide the personalized service we had always promised. Slowly, we began to win back the confidence of the industry. And then, just when I thought things could not get worse, Isabella got involved. She had grown up with my parents' constant praise and adoration, molded into their perfect daughter, and now she was an extension of their hatred for me. She went on social media posting thinly veiled comments about family betrayal and how I had taken advantage of a sick relative. It was a public relations nightmare, and while people knew it was all lies, the damage to my reputation was real. I knew I had to fight back, not just in court, but in the public eye as well. We hired a public relations firm to help manage the fallout, working to get our side of the story out there. We did not stoop to their level. We did not spread lies or attack them publicly, but we made sure people knew the truth that my uncle had left his estate to me because I was the only family member who had ever been there for him. Through it all, Emily and Tom were my rocks. Emily especially was my anchor in the storm. She stood by me through the worst of it, never wavering, never doubting that we would come out on the other side stronger. We spent long nights in the office strategizing, planning our next moves both in the legal battle and in business. It was exhausting, draining in every possible way, but I knew I could not give up. After months of back and forth, we finally got our day in court. My parents and their legal team threw everything they had at us, but in the end, the judge ruled in my favor. David's will was upheld, and I was officially recognized as the rightful heir to his estate. It was not about the money, not really. It was about vindication. It was about standing up to my parents and proving that I was not the weak, unwanted child they had always believed me to be. But even though I had won the battle, I knew this was not the end. My parents were not going to disappear from my life no matter how much I wished they would. They were still out there, still plotting, still trying to find a way to take me down. And so, with the court case behind me and Evergreen Capital stronger than ever, I braced myself for whatever came next. Life after winning the court case felt like it should have been a victory, but instead, it felt like a reprieve, a moment to catch my breath before the next storm. There was no real relief. Sure, I had secured David's estate and my parents had been defeated publicly, but I knew them too well to think this was over. They had money, power, and influence, and they would not just let this go. I could feel it in my bones. There was more to come. But for a brief moment, I allowed myself to enjoy the success of Evergreen Capital. The firm was expanding, and despite the attempts my parents had made to smear our reputation, we were landing bigger clients and making waves in the financial world. We had managed to triple our client base in just under 2 years, and our assets under management had grown to nearly $500 million. Tom and I were in talks to open a second office in Chicago, and Emily was leading negotiations with a major European investment fund that could potentially bring in millions more in capital. Things were good, better than good, actually. We were on the verge of breaking into the upper echelons of the financial world, the very world I had once been so desperate to escape. It was ironic, really, that the world I had despised as a child with its cold elites and empty wealth was now the one I was carving a space into on my own terms. But this time, I was not the outsider. I was becoming one of them, but not in the way my parents had imagined. It was in the middle of all this growth, all this momentum, that the next blow came. It started with a phone call, but not the kind I had expected. The Securities and Exchange Commission was investigating Evergreen Capital. At first, I thought it was a mistake. We had been meticulous about compliance, especially after the nightmare with my parents. We had made sure every client, every account, every transaction was above board. Tom and I had hired the best compliance officers we could find, and we had regular audits to ensure everything was in order. There was no way we could be under investigation not legitimately. But the investigation was real and it was serious. The Securities and Exchange Commission had received an anonymous tip that Evergreen Capital had been involved in insider trading. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Insider trading, that was a death sentence in our world. Even the hint of an accusation like that could ruin a firm, and we knew it. I immediately suspected my parents. It was their style, quiet, underhanded, using the power they held in the shadows to tear me down from within, and I was not wrong. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the tip had come from someone very close to my parents, a lawyer they had worked with for years. They had planted false information about one of our trades, claiming that we had acted on inside information from a tech company whose chief executive officer was a client of ours. The story was fabricated from start to finish, but the damage was already done. The investigation dragged on for months, casting a dark cloud over everything we had built. Our clients began to get nervous. Some pulled their accounts, not wanting to be associated with a firm under investigation. Others hesitated to invest new capital with us, waiting to see how the situation would unfold. We were bleeding money, not because of anything we had done wrong, but because my parents had decided to destroy me in the one way they knew would hurt the most. Emily and Tom were incredible during this time. Emily, ever the optimist, kept reminding me that the truth would come out and that we would weather this storm. But it was not just the firm's reputation that was on the line, it was mine. The whispers started again. The same old rumors that had followed me for years, that I was the unwanted son, the black sheep of a powerful family, someone who was always destined to fail. My parents' influence was far-reaching, and their attempts to isolate me were working. Even some of my oldest connections in the industry started to distance themselves, unwilling to risk their own reputations by being associated with me. It was the same isolation I had felt as a child, only this time it was much worse. I was not just losing the respect of a few classmates or my family. I was on the verge of losing everything I had worked for. And then, just as things were at their lowest, the next blow came. My father's company, Hastings Financial Group, had suddenly announced a major expansion into the brokerage space. They were planning to open their own boutique firm directly competing with Evergreen Capital. It was a calculated move, perfectly timed, to coincide with the Securities and Exchange Commission investigation. My father had seen the vulnerability and decided to strike. It was a masterstroke. Hastings Financial had the resources, the reputation, and the connections to steamroll us, and with the cloud of suspicion hanging over us, it was easy for them to poach clients. They positioned themselves as the clean alternative, the firm with impeccable credentials untouched by scandal. In a matter of weeks, they siphoned off several of our largest clients, offering them better deals and lower fees. I knew this was my mother's doing. My father did not care about brokerage. He had never shown any interest in this side of finance. But my mother had found a way to convince him that this was the path to destroying me. She was the real architect behind the attack, just as she had been in everything else, and she was succeeding. By this point, I was ready to fight back with everything I had. I was not going to roll over and let them take what I had built. We called in our legal team, but fighting Hastings Financial in court was a losing battle. They had deeper pockets, more influence, and the backing of a long-established brand, and the Securities and Exchange Commission investigation was still looming over us like a guillotine waiting to drop. Then something unexpected happened. In the middle of the chaos, Tom came to me with an idea, one that was risky, but if it worked, it could turn everything around. Tom had been quietly building connections with a new wave of tech entrepreneurs, many of them in the cryptocurrency space. These were people who did not care about old money, about the establishment, or about the traditional financial world. They were innovators, disruptors, and they were flush with cash. Tom had been working with one of these entrepreneurs, a young guy named Liam Harris, who had made billions of dollars in the cryptocurrency market. Liam was looking for a brokerage firm that could handle the volatility and unpredictability of his assets, and Evergreen Capital was perfectly positioned to offer the kind of personalized service he wanted. Tom's idea was simple: pivot the firm. Instead of trying to compete head-on with Hastings Financial and their traditional clients, we would focus on the future, on cryptocurrency financial technology, and the new wave of investors who did not play by the old rules. It was risky, no doubt about it. The cryptocurrency market was volatile, and most traditional firms steered clear of it because of the regulatory uncertainty, but we did not have a choice. If we stayed on the same path, we were finished. Emily was not sold at first. She was the cautious one, always focused on stability and long-term growth, but even she could see that we were running out of options. If we did not take a leap, Hastings Financial would crush us, and the Securities and Exchange Commission investigation would finish whatever was left. So we took the plunge. We rebranded Evergreen Capital as a forward-thinking, tech-savvy firm that specialized in high-growth, high-risk assets. We leaned into the chaos of the cryptocurrency market, offering tailored services to tech entrepreneurs, startup founders, and venture capitalists who were willing to take risks. It was a gamble, but it worked. Within months, we had secured several high-profile clients, including Liam Harris, whose wealth alone was enough to keep the firm afloat. The pivot paid off in ways I had not expected. Not only did we survive the attack from Hastings Financial, but we started to thrive in this new space. The Securities and Exchange Commission eventually cleared us of all charges, finding no evidence of insider trading. It had all been a setup, just as we had suspected, but by then we had already moved on, positioning ourselves as a leader in the new financial frontier. Hastings Financial had no foothold in the cryptocurrency world, and their attempts to compete with us fell flat. They were too stuck in their old ways, too focused on the traditional markets, and they could not keep up with the pace of innovation we had embraced. My parents were furious. They had tried everything: legal battles, public smears, corporate sabotage. But in the end, I had found a way to outmaneuver them, and not just survive, but succeed. They had underestimated me, just as they always had, and now they were left to watch as Evergreen Capital grew stronger than ever. But the victory was not just about the business. It was about proving to myself that I did not need them, that I had never needed them. Everything I had built on my own, and no amount of money, power, or influence could take that away from me. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Free from the shadow of my parents, free from the expectations of the world I had grown up in, and free to forge my own path. The battle was far from over. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid anymore. Evergreen Capital survived the SEC investigation, outgrew Hastings Financial, and became one of the fastest-growing firms in New York. Then, one day my mother showed up unannounced at my office. She looked older, smaller, no longer untouchable. She admitted Hastings Financial was collapsing after trying to destroy us. Investors were leaving, scandals were leaking, and Isabella had already abandoned the family to protect herself. Then she finally said the words I never expected to hear. "We need your help. Not love, not regret. Need." The same people who treated me like a mistake were now begging the unwanted son to save them. I looked at her and realized I didn't hate her anymore. I was just done. I told her I had spent my whole life trying to prove I deserved love, only to realize I never needed their approval in the first place. Then I picked up the framed photo of Uncle David, the only person who had ever truly cared about me, and quietly said I already have a family. I asked security to escort her out. Before leaving, she stopped at the door and whispered, "I was wrong about you." But by then, it didn't matter anymore. That night, sitting beside Emily overlooking the Manhattan skyline, I finally felt something I had never felt before: peace. Not because I beat my parents, but because they no longer had the power to define who I was.